Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar today on student loans. We have quite a few people that registered today, so we're going to give it about 3 minutes and make sure we are at critical mass for folks that are looking to join, and then we'll get started. And I appreciate your patience. For those of you that are just joining, if you're looking for the student loan webinar, you are in the right place. We are going to give it another couple of minutes to let a few more people join the webinar, and then we'll get started.
I think there was someone who raised their hand. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A and we can try to address them.
Okay, I think we're going to get started. And again, welcome to today's webinar, which is on student loans, specifically on the topic of public service loan forgiveness. My name is Nancy Neerman. I am the Assistant Director of the Education Debt Consumer Assistance Program. I'm here with my colleague and Program Director, Carolina Rodriguez. Just a few housekeeping items before we start the presentation. So I will be presenting, but if you have any questions regarding anything that you're hearing during the webinar or questions pertaining to student loans, please type them into the Q&A. We're not going to be taking verbal questions. It's just too big a group right now. So please type all your questions into the Q&A. I will break periodically, and Carolina will be answering those questions behind the scenes. And I'll break periodically to allow her to share some of these questions with and answers with the group so that everybody gets the benefit. So with that, I am going to turn my video off, share my screen, and we'll get started. Okay, Carolina, if you can just verify that you can see the screen.
I can see it, thank you. A lot of people are asking whether the recording and the PowerPoint will be shared. We will be sharing both the recording and the PowerPoint after the webinar. We do ask that you give us 1 to 2 business days to be able to send it out, but you will get it. Thank you.
Okay, so like I said, today we're going to be mainly talking about the public service loan forgiveness program and basically everything that you need to know about starting and completing the PSLF program. So this is our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about our organization. We're going to go into a few important updates, and the bulk of it is really going to be about public service loan forgiveness, a little bit of an overview, steps to ensure that you're making progress, and then current guidance for borrowers, and including some hints on how to maybe escalate cases if you need to complain or file complaints. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the some of the changes coming up with student loan borrowing limits. So, about our organization, EdCap, we are a program of the Community Service Society of New York, or CSS. CSS is a nonprofit that's been around for over 180 years. The EdCap program was established in 2019 specifically to address the issue of student debt. Student debt is a crisis in New York. It's a crisis in the country. It's the second largest consumer debt next to mortgages. Nationally, it's about a $1.7 trillion issue. In New York, there are about 2.5 million borrowers with almost $100 billion worth of debt. Now, one of the reasons, just the sheer size of the issue, is one of the reasons why this program was established. But the other reason is because, as many of you are well aware, the student loan system has become a very complicated and difficult system to navigate. So we are state funded, which allows us to offer these webinars for free, but it also allows us to offer one-on-one counseling. So as you're listening to this presentation, if you feel that you need some specialized and personalized advice, you want to reach out to us to establish to book an appointment with one of our counselors, and we'll have some information in the back of the presentation on how to do that. And we can do a whole host of things for you, including helping you determine what your best repayment option is, guiding you towards your forgiveness programs, helping you do consolidations, forbearances, resolving issues with your servicers, and even for those of you who maybe are thinking about going back to school, or you have kids who are going to school, where we're sort of helping people with that pre-college counseling as well, including filling out the FAFSA and explaining the best ways to fund higher education, particularly in the light of the new changes that are coming down the pike with the new budget bill. So, a few important updates pertaining to PSLF. The first one is regarding the SAVE plan. As most of you probably are aware, this is a plan that was introduced during the Biden administration, which was going to be the cheapest option for the vast majority of borrowers out there. It was introduced in 2023. In early 2024, there were some court challenges. And starting July of 2024, a federal appeals court placed an injunction on the Department of Education, preventing them from enrolling new borrowers in the SAVE plan or billing people at the using the SAVE formula. And that basically has meant that anybody that was in SAVE starting July of 2024 was placed in a forbearance. At the time, it was a non-interest bearing forbearance that was not eligible for forgiveness. It has since become an interest-bearing forbearance starting in August of this year. Interest is back on in the SAVE plan in that forbearance. It doesn't mean that you have to come out of the forbearance. It doesn't mean that you have to make payments. It just means that that interest is starting to accrue again. The SAVE plan, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but it's essentially this is going to go away. If it doesn't go away through the courts, it's going to go away through the budget bill, which phases it out in 2028. So we'll talk a little bit more. I'm sure there are people on this call that are enrolled in the SAVE forbearance. We're going to talk a little bit more and give you some guidance as to what you may consider doing if you're in the SAVE forbearance now and want to get out. And the other big news, of course, is the new public service loan forgiveness rule that redefines qualifying employer. And this was basically based on an executive order that the president issued back in March. They went through a process called negotiated rulemaking, which is something that the Department of Education does. And they established this new rule, which is going to go into effect on July 1st of 2026, unless there is some court action that may stop that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But essentially, what the rule does is it basically excludes organizations and governments which participate in what the administration deems to be engaging in activities with an illegal purpose. And they are defining a legal purpose as determined by the Secretary of Education by a preponderance of the evidence. They are determining an illegal purpose to be aiding or abetting violations of federal immigration laws, supporting terrorism by facilitating funding or operations of cartels. I mean, the sort of I'll mention what the specific language is. The translation to that second item is targeting organizations that are probably supporting things like, supporting Palestinians in Gaza, the situation in Gaza, engaging in the chemical and surgical castration or mutilation of children, that's gender affirming care, engaging in a pattern of aiding and abetting illegal discrimination. And there are a few more rules in there, I think, that we didn't capture, one of which kind of works. Is really targeting DEI organizations that are engaged in DEI activities. So the couple of important things to understand about this rule, because it's concerning. There's no doubt about it, and it's probably concerning to some of you who are listening to this, depending on what your job is. Um, but the important thing to know right now is that there are no changes to PSLF currently. If this rule does go into effect, it would go into effect on July 1st of 2026. Any credit that you have accumulated up until that point is going to remain untouched by this new rule. After that, if the new rule does go into effect, payments would not qualify if the employer is found to have engaged in one of these activities with an illegal purpose. And the key consequences would be that the employer would lose PSLF eligibility for 10 years unless the organization adopted a corrective action plan. A borrower would be notified in advance that this was going to happen, but the borrowers are not going to have any right to appeal that decision. And you can, if you want to read the entire rule, you can access it here on the Federal Register when you get this deck. Another key development here, though, is that within days of this rule being published, there were three lawsuits that were filed. So one represented by a group called Protect Bars, that includes a combination of states and other independent nonprofits. One led by the Commonwealth of Boston, which includes 21 states' attorney general, including the attorney general in New York, and then another representing a couple four nonprofit groups led by two legal organizations, Student Defense and Public Citizens Litigation. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. There's some very strong feelings that this rule contravenes or contradicts the statute. There is a PSLF law that's in statute that was not addressed during the budget bill. But for now, really, it's business as usual. There are no changes to the PSLF process right now. You can continue to do all the things that we're going to talk about going forward. Okay, so a quick overview of the rules for public service loan forgiveness. This program requires that you make 120 qualifying monthly payments. So that's 10 years of payments, after which your remaining loan balances are forgiven. And a qualifying payment is defined as an on-time payment made in full on or after October 1st, 2007. That's when the program started. So anything that you might have done prior to October 1st, 2007, even if it were at a qualifying employer, is not going to count towards PSLF. You must be making those payments on a direct loan. You generally must be in an income-driven repayment plan. And just for the purposes of everything that I say going forward, when I say IDR or income-driven plan, that's an umbrella term for a number of different plans that we're going to discuss. Or payments in the standard 10-year fixed repayment plan qualify as well. But remember, if you're in the standard 10-year fixed repayment plan for the life of the loan, you will have paid off the entire balance before you have anything to forgive. So generally, while payments in that plan will qualify, at some point you're going to have to switch to an IDR plan to complete the process. And then you have to meet the employment requirements. And those are, you must be working an average of at least 30 hours per week for one or more qualifying employers, which are generally nonprofits or governments, concurrently. So if you have more than one job, your two jobs at the two qualifying employers must average 30 hours per week. The payments do not have to be consecutive. So that means you could be working you could be working for a public service firm for and accumulating 3 years worth of credit. And then let's say you just leave and decide to go to the private sector for a couple of years. If you come back somewhere down the road, you lose those 3 years of credit that you already accumulated. You just pick up where you left off. Um, One key important thing to understand is that when you're submitting that last application to request forgiveness, the application that's going to get you to 120 qualifying payments, you must meet the employment requirements at the time you submit that application. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later on. One of the key and one of the best features of the PSLF plan is that the forgiven balances are not taxable at the federal level. They are also not taxable in the state of New York because the state of New York conforms to federal regulations on this. And you may be hearing or reading things about taxability returning for loan forgiveness in 2026. That is a different forgiveness program that does not apply to PSLF. Public service loan forgiveness, again, has its own statute, its own law. That was not challenged at all and in the budget bill, and so forgiven balances in public service loan forgiveness will continue to be non-taxable. Okay. Um, so let's talk about the key steps to achieving PSLF. You can think about this as just a series if you're kind of starting from scratch, or even if you're not starting from scratch, but maybe you didn't go through all these steps. You may want to kind of consider thinking about these things um, to make sure you're on the right track and earning credit for PSLF. So the first thing you need to do is verify that your employer is eligible. So if you're starting out or if you're just switching jobs, you can use the PSLF employer search tool. You don't necessarily have to be enrolled in your account to do this. I mean, you can be enrolled in your account and get something like this as well, but you don't have to actually be enrolled in your studentaid.gov account to do this. You just click on this link. You'll need to enter the employer's identification number, the EIN number without a dash, and that's this number over here. You can see it starts with 13. Normally it would be 13 dash and then the last 6 digits or 7 digits. So you just enter your EIN number without the dash. You enter the employment dates, and you're going to need to know the exact dates. And then you verify that your employer is eligible by clicking the search button. And then you can see at the bottom, it will come up with your employer and whether or not it is actually eligible. The second step, once you've done that, is that you have to verify that you have direct loans. So this is really important. This is what tripped a lot of people up when PSLF was first introduced back in 2007. People just assumed that they had the right employment and they went on their merry way making their payments, thinking that they were going to earn credit, when in fact there are these whole host of rules, other rules that pertain and make you eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And one of the key ones is that you have the right loan type, and that loan type is direct loans. So if you don't have direct loans, if you have things like FFEL loans or Perkins loans, you can consolidate those loans to make them eligible for PSLF, but you probably want to reach out for some guidance before you actually do consolidation at this point. So what you want to do is you want to log into your federal student aid or FSA account at studentaid.gov. And FSA, by the way, is an office of the Department of Education, and that's the website where all of your federal student loan information is going to be housed. In addition to that, you all have servicer accounts like Nelnet, Mohila, Advantage. Those are the folks that manage your things like billing, but for the purposes of determining what kind of loan types you have and tracking your PSLF, you want to look at federal student aid. In the My Aid section, and you can reach the My Aid section by clicking on this button called My Loans here above the green line on your dashboard, or you can just sometimes scroll down within your dashboard. You want to find loan types. And then you want to click the down arrow next to any loan with a loan balance. So if you see here on the left-hand side, you've got the top balance, the top thing says 3 consolidation loans. That's just the first part. There can be direct consolidation loans, there can be FFEL consolidation loans. You want to determine that it says you want to see the word direct in your loan type. So after you click that down arrow, if you look at the screenshot on the right, you're going to see that all of these are direct consolidation loans, which would make them eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And again, as I said, non-qualifying loans such as Fell and Perkins can be consolidated to make them eligible for public service loan forgiveness. But after the consolidation, the qualifying payment count is going to be zero. So essentially, you're starting from scratch when you consolidate an FFEL or Perkins loans into a direct loan to pursue PSLF. Step three, verify your loan status and your repayment plan. So generally speaking, you want to be in a status of in repayment, and you want to see that you're in one of the income-driven repayment plans, or that you are in a standard 10-year fixed repayment plan. So again, staying on federal student aid or FSA, you're going to navigate to the loan breakdown by servicer. And then within, you'll click on the servicer where you have balances, and it's going to give you a list of all the loans you have there at that servicer. And you're going to look for the loan status and look for the repayment plans. So in this case, the loan status says forbearance. This person happens to be in the save forbearance. Now, before the court injunction, save is one of the income-driven repayment plans, and payments being made in the SAVE plan were eligible for PSLF. Since the court injunction, the status of forbearance combined with the fact that you're in the SAVE plan means that you're not getting credit for public service loan forgiveness. And so if you want to continue to accumulate credit, you're going to have to do something about that. And we're going to get into that later. But basically, this is where you find that information to determine that you are in the right status, in the right kind of repayment plan. So you must be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan or IDR plan. And currently, there are three other plans that you can be enrolled in, which would be IBR or income-based repayment, pay as you earn or payee, or ICR, which is the income contingent repayment plan. And then eventually the new plan that was introduced as part of the budget bill, the repayment assistance plan or RAP plan, will also be eligible for the PSLF program when that becomes available, which will probably be at the latest July of next year. Um, I mentioned payments under the standard 10-year fixed plan also qualify. Um, if you're not in an eligible repayment plan, then you might want to consider switching to one of those plans. Um, Again, time spent in the save for parents currently does not count towards PSLF. You may be able to buy back time spent in that plan through the buyback program, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Time spent in default, by the way, also never counts towards PSLF. Or if you're in a school deferment or a grace period, those periods will never count towards public service loan forgiveness. So this is a little bit more detail on all of the income-driven repayment plans that are out there now, which are eligible for PSLF, which are not eligible for PSLF. I'm not going to go through all of this. I think this is here for your reference. I will maybe just mention, and I think we're going to talk about it a little bit later, that payee and ICR are currently available for student borrowers in the case of ICR. It's also available to Parent Plus borrowers who consolidate, but those two plans are going to be phased out in 2028. The remaining plans will be, and the SAVE plan will be phased out as well. And that plan is on hold. Nobody can get into that right now. For newer borrowers, you're going to be eligible for the RAP plan. For borrowers who don't borrow any loans after July 1st of 2026, you would be continue to be eligible for an IBR plan. And then in terms of the standard 10-year fixed plan, so all current borrowers have access to the standard 10-year fixed repayment plan unless your loans are consolidated and the balance is more than $7,500. After July 1st of 2026, however, if you take out new loans, you're going to only have access to one standard plan. And the payback period is going to be based on the size of the debt. So if your balance is more than $25,000, you will not have access to that standard 10-year fixed repayment plan. It will be a more extended version of that plan. So this is a good segue into the repayment plans for future borrowers. So for borrowers who take out loans on or after July 1st of 2026, even if you have existing loans prior to that date, you're pretty much going to have only one or two repayment options. One of them is going to be the standard fixed rate plan, as I was just talking about or mentioning, which is going to be available to new student and new Parent Plus borrowers. Again, it's a payback period anywhere that ranges from 10 to 25 years based on the size of the debt. So currently, there's a whole range of traditional or standard plans that you can enroll in, but that's going to be limited to just one version of that plan if you take out any loans on or after July 1st of 2026. And then in terms of a plan that's based on your income, so another income-driven repayment plan, there will only be one option. It's called the Repayment Assistance Plan or RAP plan, and that's only going to be available to student borrowers with direct loans. So Parent Plus borrowers, even if you're consolidated, you're not going to have access to this RAP plan going forward. And this plan calculates your payments at between 1 and 10% of adjusted gross income. The payment is reduced by $50 for each dependent that you claim on your tax return. That's a less generous treatment um, of family size than we currently have in our existing IDR plans. There's going to be a minimum payment of $10 on this plan. So even if you have zero income, under current IDR plans, you can get a $0 repayment plan. Under the new plan, you're going to be required to pay at least $10 a month. Now, some of the positive aspects of the RAP plan are that unpaid interest will not accrue. So this is similar to one of the features on Save, where if your payment does not cover the interest on the current plans, the unpaid interest would be added to your account balance every month. Under the RAP plan, that will not happen as long as you're making the minimum required payment. There's also going to be a $50 monthly principal subsidy so that if your payment is not reducing your principal by $50 a month, the government will kick in up to $50 to ensure that that happens. Again, you get those benefits only if you are making whatever the required payment is on the RAP plan, and it doesn't reduce your principal by $50. Spousal income can be excluded when filing separately. So this is a good thing for married borrowers. You do have the option, if you file separately, to have the payment be based on your income alone. But under the RAP plan, there is no protected income and there's no adjustment for inflation as there is in the current repayment plans, which means that this plan could get quite expensive for borrowers going forward as their income increases. There's also no cap in the RAP plan, so there's no limit to what you can pay. Um, and this plan offers forgiveness after 30 years. Now, this is not public service loan forgiveness. This is if you are not pursuing PSLF for some reason, if you decide to go into the private sector and you just are not going down that path that would get your loans forgiven in 10 years, you would have to pay in this plan for 30 years to get your loans forgiven. Um, this is in comparison to the existing plans where you have to pay for 20 or 25 years. But this plan is eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So once it becomes available, if that is the cheapest plan for you and you're pursuing PSLF, it would be definitely a viable option. Okay. And we're just going to go over some of the new rules for payments um, for like excuse me. We're going to go over some of the new rules for repaying loans and the access that you have to the different repayment plans as a result of the new budget bill. So the new budget bill, which is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act or OBBBA, states that all loans must be paid back in the same repayment plan. And this applies both to students and to Parent Plus borrowers. So what does this mean? It means that if you take out new loans on or after July 1st of 2026 for student borrowers, all your loans, including all the older ones, must be paid back in the WRAP plan or the standard plan that we just discussed. For Parent Plus borrowers, this is a more important and impactful new rule because what this means is that all loans must be paid back in the standard plan. And that's even if your loans are consolidated, Parent Plus loans cannot enroll in the WRAP plan, and so you will only have access to the standard plan and any loans that you had taken out prior to July 1st of 2026, because of the fact that all the loans have to be paid back in the same plan. If you had Parent Plus loans prior to July 1st of 2026, all of them would have to be paid back in the standard plan. And what that means is that basically Parent Plus borrowers in the future will have no access to income-driven repayment plans and no access to forgiveness programs like PSLF. Now, there is an exception. If you have both student loans for yourself and Parent Plus loans, you can pay the student loans back in the WRAP plan, and the Parent Plus loans back in the standard plan. But um, there's a lot of important information coming up for Parent Plus borrowers if you want to retain access to PSLF. So, and I don't want to get too bogged down on the Parent Plus thing. If you have questions about this because it's a sort of a critical time, you want to reach out to us for help. Now, repayment plans for legacy borrowers, and we're defining legacy borrowers as somebody who is not taking out any new loans on or after July 1st of 2026. I'm going to ask everybody, if you're raising your hand, we're not going to stop and take verbal questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A. And I'll be stopping in a minute to let Carolina kind of share some of these questions with everybody as well. So a legacy borrower is someone who does not take out new loans on or after July 1st of 2026. So you're done borrowing and all your loans have been dispersed prior to that date. So a legacy student borrower will be able to access payee and ICR under the current rules until July 1st of 2028. That's when they're planning to phase out those two plans. You'll also be able to access a modified version of IBR or the WRAP plan when that becomes available until your debt is forgiven or is paid off. Now, modified IBR plans have no income test. Currently, the IBR or the old version of the IBR plan had an income test. If your income was high compared to your loan balance and you weren't enrolled in the plan, you wouldn't be able to enroll. They also had a cap, so you would never have to pay more than the payment calculated in the standard 10-year fixed repayment plan. Under the modified version of IBR, there's no income test, so that means anybody with a direct or FFEL loan will be able to get into enroll in IBR. And there are two different versions of IBR. One of them for newer borrowers calculates payments at 10% of discretionary income. That's for anybody whose first loans were taken on or after July 1st of 2014. Or if you have loans that were taken out prior to July 1st of, that should be 2014, not 2024. If you have loans taken out before 7/1/2014, it's calculated at 15% of discretionary income. So it depends on when your loans were dispersed. Everybody will still have access to one of those two IBR plans. I will say a little caveat here is that the systems have not been updated to accommodate these new rules. So some people right now may not be able to enroll in IBR, but they should within the next month or two. They're planning on fixing the systems. Assuming that they do fix the systems, you should be able to actually get into those plans. Now, for legacy Parent Plus borrowers, again, for those people who are done borrowing, you're not planning to take out any new loans on or after July 1st of 2026. In order to retain access to income-driven repayment plans and public service loan forgiveness and income-driven repayment forgiveness as well, you must have fully consolidated loans dispersed before July 1st of 2026. So that means that you can't just file your consolidation application by July 1st of 2026. The whole process must be completed. So we're recommending that borrowers that need to do this submit their consolidation applications no later than April 1st of 2026. April 1st is not a hard deadline, but it should just allow you enough time to allow the whole process to complete, so that your new direct consolidation loans are dispersed before July 1st of 2026. And then once you've consolidated, you must enroll in the ICR plan, the income contingent repayment plan, and make one payment before you enroll in the IBR plan if that is your intention. If your plan is to enroll in IBR, you must, number one, consolidate. Number two, enroll in the ICR plan. Number three, make one payment in that ICR plan, and then you will be allowed to switch to the IBR plan. Now, the other modification of IBR is that it allows borrowers with consolidation loans that contain Parent Plus loans to enroll in IBR. In the old version of IBR, that was not allowed. So that is also a modification that has not been adjusted in the system, but it should be adjusted hopefully within the next month or two. So older loans consolidated on or after July 1st of 2026 are going to be considered new loans and then will be subject to the more restrictive repayment options. So I know this is a lot and it's probably a little confusing to people, particularly Parent Plus borrowers. If you're not sure what to do and if you want to make sure that you retain that access to IDR and PSLF, you should reach out to us for help. I should also mention, by the way, the key date here is to make sure that you consolidate your loans before July 1st of 2026. Enrolling in the ICR plan and making the payment, you have up until that ICR plan is phased out in 2028 to do that. But the key thing is focus on the consolidation. Okay, step four, after you've figured out all your repayment plan information, is verify your employment by filing the PSLF certification form. So the PSLF certification form, not to be confused with your income-driven repayment applications, which uh, which gives you the monthly payment that you're going to have to make. The PSLF certification forms verify that you've met the employment requirements for the PSLF program. It has nothing to do with which repayment plan you're in, or it doesn't dictate what kind of payment you're going to be making. You must submit the form. You must submit one form for every qualifying employer that you've had since October 1st of 2007, or later if your loans were dispersed later. You should use the PSLF help tool from your federal student aid account for the fastest and most accurate way of processing. You want to submit these things annually or whenever you change jobs. There's no deadline for submitting them, but if you don't submit them, you won't have an official qualifying payment count. And you don't want to wait, you know, 6, 7, 8 years to go back. Well, you can, by the way, but you don't want to wait 6 or 7 or 8 years and be filing, 8 or 9 years of these things at the same time. It's just much more efficient if you do it on an annual basis. Now, that's not to say if there are some people that are listening to this, if you've never done this before, it is retroactive. If you haven't done it and you think you've got 8 years of qualifying employment or 10 years of qualifying employment, by all means, you want to go back as far as you can to those previous employers, or if it's with your current employer, that would be a relatively simple thing, and get all of your employment up to date and verified. Key thing here is that when you use the PSLF help tool, you want to request an electronic signature from your employer. This is going to dramatically speed up the processing of these applications. We've seen these counts get updated literally within days if you submit the forms this way. Anything that you submit with a manual signature is going to take a lot longer to process, could take several months to process. Okay. And this is just a little bit of an illustration of how the various steps that you need to go through when you file that PSLF certification form. This looks very similar to the PSLF search tool. The first thing you're going to do is basically add your qualifying employers. again, with the EIN number, the exact employment dates, and they must be exact month, day, and year. And then you hit search. It's going to tell you who your employer is and whether or not they're eligible. And then you start completing the rest of the application, fill in the questions. So the employment status, hours per week, whether the organization is closed or not. Um, for those of you that remember doing this form back in the day when everything was manual, this cuts down dramatically on the errors that frankly a lot of employers made on these forms. Well intentioned as they were, it just there was a lot of questions and they frequently did not fill the forms in correctly and they were constantly getting tossed back. So this is a much streamlined process that is we found to be very helpful. Once you've submitted the form, you can actually just track it through the My Activity section of your federal student aid account. And then finally, you want to track your progress, and you're going to track the progress through the PSLF tracker. So once you submit, if you've never done this before, once you submit your first PSLF certification form, and assuming you have any qualifying payments, they're going to put a tracker up on your federal student aid account that allows you to monitor your progress towards PSLF. You're going to get month by month detail of your payment status for each loan. The count will only update when you submit these new forms. So a lot of people think that once you submit that first form, it just automatically updates the longer you stay with your employer. That's not the case. The government doesn't know where you're at with your employment, so you must submit these forms to keep them in the loop about where you are and update your qualifying payment counts. And again, I'm going to reinforce here that you must meet the employment requirements at the time you submit that last PSLF certification form that's going to get you to 120 qualifying payments. So if you think you're going to be at 120 qualifying payments, like, next month, don't quit your job before you submit that form because then you will not be able to actually achieve PSLF. So the tracker is going to have three different tabs on it: loan details, payment history, and employment certification. And then it's going to list each one of your loans with a qualifying payment count and a remaining count. And actually, we can see that a little bit better on this next slide. So under loan details, you can click into the individual loan. It's going to show you how many payments are qualifying. You can click view for even more detail than that. And then it's going to show you the number of payments that need employer certification. So those are the months where you may have met all of the other qualifications of the program, but you just haven't submitted a PSLF certification form. Now, you may not be able to submit a PSLF certification form for all of these months. So if you look at this example, this person has 41 months where they haven't submitted an employer certification form, but it's possible they didn't have employment during that period. So they're not going to get credit for that period, but it just shows you the maximum amount that you would be that would be eligible for. And it gives you an estimate of when you might achieve public service loan forgiveness. If you click into the payment history tab, it's going to show you, again, month by month for all the different loans, and you'll be able to filter in different ways. You can filter by individual loan. You can filter by a specific time period. You can filter by the payment status. So show me all the qualified payments that I have. Show me all the months that need employment certification. Show me all of my ineligible payments. And you can look at those months and determine if there are any things that you think are mistakes that need to be disputed. So it's a really helpful tool once you know how to use it. It also has an employment certification tab. This is where it's going to show you all of your employment through all of the years, how far back it goes, what's the last time you're actually certified for. I would be, by the way, just a little bit suspicious of these submission dates. We've noticed that these submission dates um, don't always make sense. Sometimes the submission dates are before the date that your period of employment was certified. So, uh, you know, look at the submission dates with a cautious eye. I'd be more focused on the certification period, which shows you in this particular example, this person is certified up through the end of, or up through May of 2022. So if they were still working and they were still looking to earn credit towards PSLF, they would want to submit an updated PSLF certification form to update their qualifying payment count. So you want to confirm that all your employment periods are accurately certified. And then if that doesn't match up and you're not still not getting credit for certain months you think you should be getting credit for, you would probably want to file what's called a PSLF reconsideration request to have them re-examine the count. Okay, I'm going to stop there, Carolina, because I've been talking a lot, and let you go through some questions.
Okay, so this is great. 31 questions to answer, and I think I have another 30 to answer. But I want to just highlight a few things. Number one, I think we do have a mix of borrowers, some who are early on. I want to stress that you should file your PSLF employment certification form and not wait. If you have a qualifying employer, submit it so you can get that PSLF tracker. Do not wait until you finish working for 10 years. You will regret it, in part because in 10 years, your loans may go through multiple servicers. There may be payment information lost. I know it's the federal government. They will lose your records. They might make mistakes when they're transferring your loans from one servicer to another. So the best way is to get that PSLF tracker. Now, the best way to submit it is through the PSLF help tool, which Nancy already mentioned. I put that in the chat. Some of you requested that. Electronic is best, so be aware of that. There was a question about consolidation. I know, I think, Nancy, that's going to be your next section. So I'll let you cover that. Um, when should you be submitting your PSLF forms? As Nancy mentioned, your records don't get updated automatically, so we recommend yearly. And when you change jobs. Someone asked about getting the processing forbearance. So technically, when you're switching plans, you should be able to get 60 days that count towards PSLF. People have had issues where the servicer is not giving them that, and people are obviously wanting to complain about that. We will talk about the different complaint mechanisms, but you can file a complaint with your servicer. And if you don't want to wait on the phone, you can actually upload a letter that says, hey, you guys made a mistake. Here's the narrative, any supporting documents, and upload it. They should be processing that. Again, Nancy's going to mention some of that. There was a really good question that I think it's worth elevating. It's been a while since we've had to really elevate it, and that is, does time in the COVID forbearance count? Um, so the short answer is yes, if you meet the other PSLF requirements. So if you had your loans, quote unquote, in the COVID payment pause, and you were working for a qualifying employer for an average of 30 hours, and your loans were in the COVID pause status, all you need to do is submit your PSLF employment form to get credit for that time. So I'm excited to share that, like, I was one of those people that benefited from the COVID forbearance because I got credit for that time period that I didn't have to actively repay. There is the possibility for people who have been dealing with student loans for a while that you may have credit without knowing, even if you were not paying under the IDR account adjustment. Nancy, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about the IDR account adjustment, but just to be sure that my takeaway for that, when in doubt, submit your employment certification form for every employer you've had since, what is it, July or October? Why am I getting my dates wrong? First,
October 1st of 2007.
October 1st, 2007. Too many Julys in my radar
Yeah.
recently.
Well, there's a lot of Julys in the current situation.
Yeah. But I want to say that in order for you to get credit, the loans had to be in existence and technically, quote unquote, in repayment. You will get credit. So that's my takeaway there. If you want to maximize your credit, just submit the employment certification forms. There was someone who said, well, now I have a part-time, but I don't think that part-time qualifies for PSLF. Well, that won't really matter in the sense that if you have another job and you're working 30 hours and that job is qualifying, that's all you need. If you end up having a second job that doesn't qualify for PSLF, it doesn't disqualify you. So you should, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just want to add also, so the old rules in PSLF said that you had to have been considered a full-time employee, regardless of how many hours you were working. There's actually the new rules are you don't necessarily, if you're part-time and you're working an average of 30 hours per week, that qualifies. So you just have to work that average of 30 hours per week, either at one job or at two or more, um, because they slightly redefined full-time.
Yeah. And my questions are increasing a lot, so I'm getting nervous. But I will say
Well,
one last, yeah, I'll say one last thing, and this is about the process. There were a few people that are like one payment away from PSLF, so I'm really excited for you. I want to like scream. So that is amazing. So just so you know, from a process perspective, you want to submit, quote unquote, what we call the final PSLF form once you know you will reach the 120. So if your last payment is November, I would usually say just file the final form December. There's no different form. It's the same form using the PSLF help tool. At that point, you should have the option to get into a forbearance. If you're nervous and you want to make one extra payment and you can afford it, go for it. After you see that you actually have the 120 qualifying payments, take a screenshot of that and you should be okay to go into the forbearance. When do your loans get actually discharged? It's actually an entire process. FSA has to pull your credit record. First, your servicer sends your payment record, FSA runs their data, and then FSA will send a final data request to discharge your loans. So know that there is this back and forth between FSA and your servicer to make the actual discharge happen. And that can take a few weeks, and it can take like a couple months or a little bit more. We don't have like a go pulse anymore, given everything that's happening. But it will happen. It's just a waiting game. Sometimes you're lucky that you finish and they did the file run soon after. Sometimes like you just missed the file run. It will happen. You do have the option once you have the 120 to get the forbearance. And Nancy, I'm going to let you continue because I know we're running out of time.
Yes, and I was trying to answer some of those questions, that although the questions keep piling up, but I tried to answer some of them. I did want to address one question. Somebody said that they consolidated a Perkins loan, I think during the COVID period, and they were worried that they would lose their qualifying payment count. If you consolidated your non-direct loans prior to um, July 1st of 2024. So if you consolidated prior to that date, you would get the benefit of this thing called the IDR account adjustment that Carolina just mentioned. This was a one-time program that the Biden administration offered that gave you retroactive credit towards that IDR forgiveness, that long-term forgiveness, and public service loan forgiveness based on a set of relaxed rules. And if you consolidated during that period, you should get credit towards PSLF for some of those some of those time periods uh, prior to the consolidation when you had non-qualifying loans. If you consolidate now going forward, or consolidated anytime after July 1st of 2024, the IDR account adjustment was over at that point. We revert back to the old rules, which are if you consolidate FELP loans or Perkins loans, um, you're starting from zero because those loans are not eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Okay. Consolidation. And I would just say this with a little bit of a qualifier here that if you're considering consolidating your loans and you're confused about this, you probably want to reach out for a little bit of guidance. But there were rules that were introduced in 2023 that allows borrowers to consolidate loans that have PSLF credit and receive weighted average retroactive credit post consolidation. So what that means is that, and I'm going to go through like an example of how this works. In the old days, prior to this rule going into effect, if you consolidated any loan, whether it's a direct loan or a FELP loan, but if you consolidated any of your direct loans, if you had any accumulated credit you had for PSLF would have been wiped out during the consolidation. These new rules allow you to retain some of that credit going forward. So you don't lose credit that you've already accumulated on your direct loans prior to the consolidation. There's a couple of things that you need to do, though, before you consider doing this. You want to get an updated qualifying payment count on all of the underlying loans because that count is what is going to determine what your weighted average is post the consolidation. So submit those PSLF certification forms using the process we defined earlier, which is the electronic signature to get a relatively quick payment count. You do that before you consolidate the loans. You want to take screenshots of all the updated counts before consolidating, even though they very often stay on your federal student aid tracker. You want to make sure you have that information saved. Now, if you do include non-direct loans like FELP loans or Perkins loans in the consolidation, for the purposes of that calculation to see how many qualifying payments you have after the consolidation, assuming you have some direct loans that have payments, the PSLF credit for those non-direct loans is going to be zero as part of that calculation. Now, Parent Plus loans, unconsolidated, are eligible for PSLF credit, but generally they need to be consolidated so they can enroll in an income-driven repayment plan to continue the process. So you want to be very careful about that July 1st, 2026 deadline that we were talking about earlier and make sure that you're fully consolidated before that date. Um, so consolidated loans dispersed on or after July 1st of 2026 are going to be considered new loans, and then they're going to be subject to these new repayment rules. Again, particularly important for Parent Plus borrowers. So PSLF weighted average credit, we actually do have a calculator on our website. You'll be able to link to it here. If you are somebody that's got multiple direct loans and you want to determine whether or not consolidating is worth it for you because sometimes it's going to save you some months or even years in repaying your entire balance. You can use this tool. And in this particular example, you've got this person has two loans. They're each $50,000. One has 25 qualifying payments. One has 75 qualifying payments. So before consolidation, they have a total balance of $100,000. They would have to pay for 95 months. So basically, they pay as long as they must pay on the loan with the smallest amount of credit to get their entire balance forgiven. And so that's almost 8 years they would have to pay. Post consolidation, they're going to have 50 months on 50 qualifying months on their post consolidation loans. So they now go from having to pay for 7 years, almost 8 years, down to almost 6 years. So they've saved about 2 years by going through this process. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You can always play around with the calculator or reach out to us if you want a little bit more explanation of whether or not this makes sense. But you probably want to go through this exercise to determine whether it's worth your while to doing the consolidation. If it's only going to save you a couple of months, it's probably not worth it. If it looks like it may save you years, then you might want to consider it. All right. Now, I want to talk about the PSLF buyback. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about this. The buyback, again, was another regulation that was implemented in 2023, although that IDR account adjustment made the PSLF buyback process really unnecessary until the IDR account adjustment was over. And what the buyback does is it allows you to purchase PSLF credit for months that you may have spent in a disqualifying status. But you have to meet certain criteria in order to be able to do the buyback. Number one, you must have 120 qualifying months of employment on record, not qualifying payments. If you have 120 qualifying payments, you don't need to do the buyback. But you must have 120 qualifying months of employment on record, which means you may have to update your PSLF certification forms and update your employment. And then the months that you buy back must get you to 120 qualifying payments. So if you, as an example, have 110 qualifying payments already banked and you've got 120 qualifying months of employment, if you have 10 months that you could buy back, which for those of you who have been in the save forbearance, you probably all have at least 10 months, then you are eligible to do the buyback. If you are at 80 qualifying payments and you only have 15 months that you can buy back, you're not going to be eligible yet because the number of months that you buy back must get you to 120 qualifying payments. You can't purchase months prior to a consolidation, and you can't purchase months spent in school deferments, grace periods, or default. The payments are based on payments you were making in an IDR plan prior to entering the disqualifying status and possibly immediately after exiting that status. If you're trying to buy back months that straddle two tax periods, you may be asked to provide updated tax filing information. And I think the key takeaway here is for those of you who are waiting for the buyback, because you think you're going to be able to buy back at a much lower, you're waiting for the buyback and you're in the save forbearance, because you think you might be able to buy back at like the very low save rates. Number one, you won't be able to do that because they're not allowed to bill people at the using the save formula. So the payments are going to probably be calculated using a different formula, one of the one of the older or existing repayment plans. So they're going to be a little bit higher. And if you're buying back a period that straddles two different tax years, you're going to have to provide your most recent income for at least a portion of that buyback. So it may not be saving you as much money as you think it might be. What it does save you if it works is time. Um, if you think that you're eligible, you can submit the request through the PSLF reconsideration portal and then select the buyback option. I think we've got some slides on this. One key thing to understand about buyback is that you should do it. If you think you're eligible for it, you should do it. But the processing of these applications is very, very slow. And based on some status reports that we've seen, it could take easily over a year for them to work through the backlog. Uh, could be a couple of years. I mean, we haven't seen any recent data because of the shutdown, but I'm sure these buyback applications are piling up. So this is the buyback request through that reconsideration portal. It's going to ask you your personal information, and then really all you have to do, there's like one of three options. You're gonna choose your reconsideration type. You simply click PSLF buyback and submit. You're probably going to get one email acknowledging that you submitted the form, and then you sit back and wait for the buyback request to come through. And the buyback is, by the way, when you submit these forms, it doesn't obligate you to anything. What's going to happen is they're going to generate a letter, a proposal, and says, okay, we're going to let you buy back X number of months for this amount of money per month. This is what the total, and you have 90 days to pay that total. And if you don't want to do it or you can't do it, you just simply you don't accept the proposal. So there's not a lot of downside to submitting the buyback application. It can't harm you. You just may have to wait a really long time to actually get the proposal. So I quickly want to go through some guidance for borrowers. I think a lot of this is what you've been waiting for. So if you're currently enrolled in IBR, PayE, or ICR, just keep making those payments to earn your public service loan forgiveness credit. But remember that PayE and ICR are going to be phased out on July 1st of 2028. So you're going to have to switch out of those plans if you still need to make payments beyond that date. And then we talked about the plans that you may have access to. If you are in the save forbearance, here are some reasons to remain in the save forbearance. Now, if you look on your servicer accounts, you may see that the forbearance end date in most of the accounts that I've seen recently has been pushed back to like November of 2028 or sometime late in 2028. The save forbearance is going to end whenever the court decision ends. But if the court decision doesn't happen before 2028, the save plan will end. So it looks like they are intent in keeping people in the save forbearance until either the courts take it out or it disappears as a result of the new budget bill. But there may be reasons, at least temporarily, why you might want to remain in the save forbearance. So if you can't afford any repayment plan right now, and you just need to buy a little time to kind of look around and create a strategy, that's one reason to do it. Um, Avoiding higher payments. So switching repayment plans requires that you provide recent proof of income, which could be a lot more than the last time you submitted proof of income. So if you think that your income is going to drop soon, like next year, you might want to wait until you can, until your income actually does decline and submit the plan to switch out of the save forbearance at that time. If you think that the repayment assistance plan or the RAP plan is going to be your best option, then you might be able to remain in the save forbearance until that plan becomes available, which we believe is going to be no later than July of 2026. Now, for borrowers in SAVE who meet the buyback requirements, we're generally recommending sort of a two-pronged approach to this. So submit the buyback request like we were just discussing. There's no downside to that. But you also might want to consider switching into a new IDR plan to make payments to earn additional credit towards PSLF. And this is particularly if you have less than a year to go or 6 months or less, for PSLF, you may not want to stick around for a year or two to wait for that buyback proposal. Again, no harm in submitting it, but you might also want to switch your repayment plans, start making a payment, and just see which strategy gets you to PSLF faster. For all other borrowers who are in SAVE, you're not able to do the buyback, but you can afford other payments. Now's the time to consider switching out into a different income-driven repayment plan. You want to find the cheapest available option for you. You can do that by using the loan simulator on studentaid.gov. If you're able to connect to the IRS database during the IDR application, to provide the proof of income that way, these applications could process relatively quickly. So if you're going to do this, be prepared to come out of your plan within the next month and start making another payment. However, you're required to provide manual uploads of proof of income. It could take several months for them to process the application. And as Carolina mentioned a little while ago, once you submit the application, you should be placed in a processing forbearance. Time spent in a processing forbearance is eligible for PSLF for up to 2 months. So you could, if it takes that long, get a couple of months of free credit towards PSLF. For Parent Plus bars, I can't emphasize this enough. You must consolidate your loans before July 1st of 2026. Again, that's fully consolidated, so you want to submit that application no later than April 1st. You must enroll in an IDR plan by July 1st of 2028 to continue to gain access to IDR options. And then, of course, you must enroll in the ICR plan and make that one payment before switching to IBR, if that's what you want to do. For Parent Plus loans that are dispersed on or after July 1st of 2026, you're not going to have any access to RAP or modified IBR plans for any of your Parent Plus loans, even those that were dispersed earlier. So no path to IDR, no path to PSLF forgiveness. So you want to be looking at doing the consolidations and even some of the IDR enrollments now. If you're planning to take new loans for the spring, you want to consolidate those immediately upon disbursement. Those are generally dispersed in, I think, January or February. So you want to consolidate those, right when, assuming those are your last loans that you're going to take, consolidate those immediately. If you have defaulted Parent Plus loans, now's the time to think about consolidating those. That will serve two purposes. It'll get you out of default, and it'll also set you up to continue access to IDR and forgiveness. And then, like I said, if you're planning to borrow after July 1st of 2026, you're going to be locked into the standard plan for all of your Parent Plus loans. So for Parent Plus borrowers, you might even consider, let's say if you've got a kid that's 3 years in and you only have 1 year left to do, and you yourself are pursuing loan forgiveness on your Parent Plus loans, you might even consider a private loan for that last year. We generally don't recommend private loans, but in this instance, it will allow you to at least retain access to forgiveness for the current debt that you've accumulated in the federal system. And then escalating complaints or escalating cases, if you've got if you run into problems, which I know people are running into problems, and it's been very difficult to resolve these issues given the current environment, and particularly with the shutdown and the drastic staff reductions at the Department of Education. But there are some ways and some processes that you can follow to dispute various things. So you generally want to start with the student loan servicer by phone, online, or in writing. Even if the servicer says this is not our area, you want to start with the servicer. They may say you must go to the Department of Education for this. You can also then go to the Federal Student Aid Ombudsman and submit a complaint online. There's also a phone number to call. In New York State, the Department of Financial Services oversees loan servicers, so they may be able to help. And there's a link to their complaint portal. And then finally, and this is an area that I think is more heavily utilized now because of the much reduced staff at the federal government. Um, go to your congressional representative. They may be able to help. They love to actually resolve problems for their constituents. An organization called Protect Borrowers created this casework toolkit that we've linked to here, that you can kind of look that over, and it goes over the various steps that you need to get the best outcomes from filing with your congressional representatives. Um, and the Department of Financial Services and your congressional representatives will usually ask you to file a complaint with your servicer first, regardless of what the problem is. So just check off that step first before you do any of these other items. And then finally, if you're thinking about going back to school, if you've got kids that are going back to school, there are some changes to borrowing limits as part of the new budget bill effective July 1st of 2026. For undergraduate students, these are people borrowing subsidized and unsubsidized loans for undergraduate school. No changes to those limits. Direct unsubsidized loans for graduate school, if you're pursuing a master's degree, the annual limit is $20,000, $20,500. That hasn't changed, but there's now a lifetime limit of $100,000 for that master's degree. For a professional degree, like law or medical degree, and there's a list of about 11 degrees that automatically qualify as professional degrees that should be published at some point on federal student aid. It's a $50,000 annual limit and a lifetime limit of $200,000. And the important thing here is that the Graduate Plus loans, which is what borrowers would have taken out to fill the gap between any other borrowing of unsubsidized loans for graduate school and the cost of attendance, those Graduate Plus loans are going to be phased out starting July 1st of 2026. So basically, people are going to be limited to a couple $100,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but for a law degree or a medical degree, it may not cover the entire cost. And there also will be Parent Plus loan limits. In the past, parents could borrow up to the cost of attendance for their dependent undergraduate students. So that's cost of attendance minus whatever aid the student was getting. Now there were going to be limits. It's an annual $20,000 limit per child and lifetime limit of $65,000 per child for both parents. Now, there is a grandfathering clause for the plus loan borrowing. So if the student has a direct loan dispersed before July 1st of 2026, graduate students and parents can borrow under the existing rules, meaning up to the cost of attendance, for a maximum of 3 years to complete the student's program of study. But just remember that the loans must be paid back under the new rules, which has significant consequences for Parent Plus borrowers. So that was a lot. And I'm going to stop there. We have some links in the back of the deck for you. And of course, it also has our EdCap contact information, where you can reach us by email, by phone, or by trying to book an appointment online. So Carolina, I'm going to stop there and see if you have any last questions that we need to address.
I am coming. Sorry.
Sorry.
Um, just to clarify, people have asked, can you make more payments to expedite PSLF? The answer is no. The reason being is that to qualify, every month has to meet the basic requirements of you make a payment based on an income-driven repayment plan, meaning you have to be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan, pay the amount required under the plan, and you have to be working for a qualifying employer an average of 30 hours per week. So you could make two payments. It won't count as two payments because you only get credit per month, right? Someone also asked, well, what if I worked, I don't know, 12 years? Uh, can I file PSLF? Same answer. It's not just that you work for a qualifying employer for 12 years, you have to meet the other requirements for every month. Once you get to the 120, then you should be able to have your loans discharged through PSLF. Um, how is discretionary income determined? Nancy, do you want to take that one?
So, the discretionary income is your adjusted gross income minus 150% of the federal poverty level for a family of your size. Discretionary income is only used in the existing repayment plans. So IBR, ICR, pay as you earn. It was also used in the SAVE plan. It is not being used in the WRAP plan. The discretionary income is what includes a portion of your income is protected. So the 150% of the that 150% of the federal poverty level for a family of your size is protected from any payment. And it also has an inflation adjustment in it through the federal poverty levels. Neither of those things exist with the WRAP plan. With the WRAP plan, it's a strict percentage of your adjusted gross income.
Yeah. Should people stuck in SAFE switch to IBR? My recommendation is yes, switch to IBR if you can afford it. Here's the advice I'm giving clients. Go to studentaid.gov, go on loan repayment, and then click the IDR application. Run the IDR application. You don't have to submit it. Just run it and see what are your repayment plan options, whether it's IBR, payee, because depending on the loans you have, is it going to be 10% under IBR, 15% under IBR? Take a look at that. And if you can afford to switch, switch it. Now, if you're tinkering with the idea, that deadline I would give you to make a decision in the immediate. Obviously, you can stay unsafe until you get kicked out, which we don't exactly know when. But my advice is to do it before you file your taxes next year because the system picks up on your most recent tax filing IRS data. Chances are, if you are unsafe, you either have old income data or I am pretty sure like your income has gone up and in some cases significantly. So if you don't want your 2025 income to be reflected on your payment and you still want your like 2024, you have to do the plan switch, do the application before you file your taxes next year. So that's kind of like a deadline if you're tinkering with the idea. The best advice is run the IDR calculator. I don't know, Nancy, if you can put the IDR link in the chat to the application for people to have it. The next question is, how do I know if I am 10% of IVR versus 15% if you took out loans and then consolidated? If you had any loans prior to July 1st, 2014, you're going to be 15% even if you consolidate. That's the rule. If you took out loans only after 2014, July 2014, you're going to be IBR 15%. Some people who are at IBR 15%, not all, may qualify for payee that may be 10%, but know that payee is going to sunset in 2028. However, if I were you, I wouldn't care. All you have to do is switch back again in 2028, but you could potentially benefit from a slightly lower payment. So,
Can I just
yeah.
add one thing to this? If you go through the steps that Caroline was just describing, and it doesn't show you an option to enroll in IBR, it probably is because of that income test that I mentioned earlier that is going to be eliminated, but has not been eliminated yet. So you may not be seeing all of your options if the IBR option does not show up. So it just might mean that you might want to come back and look at it in December because they're now saying that they're going to fix this in December, although I wouldn't hold them too closely to that timeline, but that's what they're saying.
Yeah, and reach back out to us if you're like struggling and not seeing those options. We also want to keep a pulse on it. Where can we tell when our next recertification is due? Generally, your servicer account. I want to emphasize this. You should have access at all times to your servicer account, and you should be checking it, and you should have access to your FSA account. FSA, especially if you're pursuing PSLF, that's where you're going to be tracking, submitting your forms for PSLF. Your servicer account is the one managing your payments. So both are similarly important, and you want to keep a pulse on both. On the servicer website, you may have to click on like loan details to see it. Take it with a grain of salt. Some servicers will do like a placeholder. I know that there's some rumors, I don't know, Nancy, 2028 of a recertification date. We don't know. Like, just keep an eye out. If we are in pay, yes, you can stay. Now, do you have to recertify on payee before 2028? We don't know. Chances are you will. Just remember that recertifying was a yearly thing, except for COVID, that they kept pushing back the recertifications. Generally, you are expected to recertify. Your servicer is going to let you know about 2 to 3 months in advance when you are due to recertify. Again, word of caution, it has been chaotic, the few attempts that they've made to recertify. So keep that into account. Legacy student loan borrowers do not need to consolidate to go into IBR. Correct. You do not need to consolidate if you're not going to borrow more after 2026, if you're not going to consolidate after 2026, you should be considered legacy borrower and you should have access to the same repayment plans that you currently have access. In July 2026, you would arguably also have access to the RAP plan, unless you're a Parent Plus loan borrower, which, as Nancy probably already grilled in us, that's another story. Reach out if you're a Parent Plus loan borrower. Um,
By the way, I just put the link to the EdCap contact information into the chat for those of you who are asking about how you can schedule an appointment. That's also going to be in the deck when you get the deck.
Yeah, I have undergrad loans that should qualify for PSLF and grad loans they won't. So yes and no, that doesn't quite make sense. So, um, what you may be saying is that you had qualifying employment for undergrad loans, so file your PSLF forms to get credit. It's possible that your graduate loans won't have any qualifying payment. In order to finish PSLF, you need to reach 120 qualifying payments on each loan, right? So it's possible that all your undergrad is going to have a payment count. If you're a 120, great. Your grad may not have any because you have a new employer. Regardless, if you want to finish off with PSLF, each loan must meet the 120 qualifying payments. And if you have a new job that doesn't qualify, and let's say you're already at 119 in your undergrad loans, you would need to go back and get a qualifying employer to submit that final payment. Because one of the quirky rules that doesn't make sense is that you have to be employed by the time you reach the 120. So reach out if I'm confusing you and you need a little bit more one-on-one guidance. I have three different loans. Should I consolidate? So technically, people should not have to consolidate if all your loans are direct and all of them have the same payment count. Nancy went over the thing about consolidation. The only time that we may recommend, and now it's going to get even more tricky and time sensitive, is if you have different loans with different payment counts. Like literally, I was just talking to a client who now has three loans with 120 qualifying payments and three other loans with 108. Now it's a little too late because those 120 are going to get discharged. That even if we try to consolidate to get a weighted average to get them all to be paid off at the same time through PSLF, we won't be able to do it. So takeaway, no, if you have direct loans, you don't need to consolidate, especially if they have the same payment count. The only time that you might consider it is if you have different direct loans with different payment counts and you want to just have them all with the same payment count. It's going to be a weighted average. Nancy, I don't know if the calculator is in the chat, but people can play around with the weighted average calculator to see how that looks like.
Yeah, it's not in the
Um,
chat yet, but it is on the deck. So, but I'll try to put it there.
What are the employment requirements? You basically work for the equivalent of 10 years for a qualifying employer, nonprofit, government agency, and you make payments under an income-driven repayment plan, and you track your progress through the PSLF help tool or filing the employment forms. Once you get to the 120, your loans are discharged. But you don't have to really do anything once you reach the 120 other than, again, wait a little bit and don't stress, just take screenshots. It should be automatic once you get to the 120. Um, if you have Perkins loans, reach out to us. We need to talk because those are a different monster, especially if you already have credit towards PSLF on your other loans. I hate to say it, we might need to just like figure out how we pay off the Perkins because if you combine them with your other loans that have credit, you could reset the clock to zero, and that is a very dangerous thing to do. So let's not do that. Reach out. We can help you out. Mm, So when you submit a PSLF form, this is a great point. It's gonna ask you for your start. Date, and that is the same, right? So for if you're submitting a form every year and you've been working for the same employer for 5 years, your employment start date is always going to be the same, and you would just select I'm still employed. If you like left that employment, that's when you do the employment start and end dates. For the employment start and end dates, they have to be very specific, right? Like you need the month, the year, and the day. You cannot just make up a date. Otherwise, the employer is going to have to correct it and you're going to have more issues. Um, oh, someone said, I'm sorry, I misread the question, that under PSLF form is asking for employer information for 2015 to 2017. Do you have to submit it again? Check your PSLF tracker to see if you got credit already for 2015 to 2017. If you didn't, or if you're missing an employer, then you need to go back and see what happened to that form. I cannot tell you the number of people that have submitted forms and they never heard and they never really checked their PSLF tracker or not even gotten a PSLF tracker and they're still waiting. Listen, if you're not proactive, the government doesn't care. You really need to be on top of it. File your forms, follow up, make sure that you're getting credit for each one. And we've had clients that didn't realize that they didn't get credit because the employer by mistake changed the hours to less than the 30, and that was a mistake. And so once we fixed that, they were eligible for PSLF. Again, little things that can cost you a lot of money. Um, I will finish my payments on ICR this year in May. Do I need to do anything? Not really. I don't think, if you have to recertify, you would take the lead from the servicer. If they ask you to recertify, then just follow the instructions. But otherwise, May is around the corner in my mind, so you should be okay. Um, Suppose you were not enrolled in school in 2007. Will you still need information from that employer? No. So you only need really for PSLF, the conditions are you were working for a qualifying employer and your loans were quote unquote in repayment. We say when in doubt, just submit it from 2007 if you're doubting when your loans enter repayment. But for example, if you took loans out in 2014 and you were working in 2007, 8, 9, 10, and so forth, no, you don't need to submit those forms because your loans were not in existence. Your loans needed to, at minimum, exist, quote unquote, be in repayment for you to start accumulating credit.
Can I
Uh,
can I
I,
just,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to interject here because there's been a bunch of people that are asking about whether or not they should submit the forms before they reach 120 qualifying payments. I just want to reiterate, yes, you don't have to, but we really strongly recommend that you do this annually. Because what happens is if you wait 10 years to do it, you're going to have to go back and find your employer or employers from 10 years ago, which can be hard to track down. Sometimes they go out of business, sometimes they don't have your information. You really, in order for this to be seamless and also for you to consistently track your progress, you want to submit them annually or when you change jobs, and of course, when you get to 120 qualifying payments.
I actually have like a real life story. So when I was pursuing PSLF back in the day, I'm gonna give my age out. There was no PSLF tracker, and I basically waited like 2 years before my 10-year anniversary and submitted the form. And FSA and my servicer didn't want to give me credit for 3 entire years, despite having proof of payment. Like I had kept everything. Mind you, I'm an attorney that does this for a living, right? So there is absolutely no reason why anyone pursuing PSLF should not be filing their forms literally the moment they have qualifying payments, right? Like the moment you get hired, maybe like work at least 3 to 4 months and then submit that form to trigger that tracker. And then when you leave that employment, submit your form before you do the exit interview to get it signed. A lot of mistakes are going to happen. Please do not wait the 10 years. You will regret it. A lot of things can go wrong, and I hate to say it, holding the federal government accountable is nearly impossible. That has been my experience personally, and that has been my experience professionally. So take that for what it's worth. Um, I have worked for nonprofits since 2016, but I haven't paid my loans until 4 years ago. What is the process to get retroactive? Same process. File the PSLF forms. When in doubt, file the forms. That's going to let you know what your credit looks like. Again, some people may have credit despite not making payments because under the IDR account adjustment and other initiatives by the Biden administration, they were actually giving credit for some of the forbearances. So yes, please file the PSLF form using the PSLF help tool. Um, does work through an assigned counsel panel meet the qualifying employment requirement? It may. You might want to reach out to us. We get this question every 2 years, and I think there were new rules depending on what it is and the need in the region and all that. Nancy, I don't know if you remember a little bit more
I'm sorry,
about
can you
this, but
repeat the question? I was typing. What was the question?
does work through an assigned counsel panel meet the qualifying employment requirement? I'm taking this to me like, some areas where,
Yeah,
yeah,
it may. We would have to look at it. It depends on whether or not the position could not be filled by law.
yeah.
So yeah, we would have to
Reach
look.
out. We can dig out some resources. Can I pay many payments at once to get credit? Not necessarily. The only way to get retroactive credit and we should probably talk would be buyback. So that's the only way to do it. So you making a lump sum payment saying, I want you to apply this to year X, Y, and Z, that's not going to work. You would have to go through the formal process of buyback. But my first recommendation is make sure you file all your employment certification forms to know what credit you're missing and then figure out if those months would be eligible for a buyback. Um,
And
StudentAid.gov has an entire buyback webpage that I recommend people review. Go ahead,
yeah, I
Nancy.
should also mention that we didn't talk about this and it doesn't apply to anybody right now, but the wrap plan, if you're in the wrap plan, you will not be able to do the buyback. You won't be able to do the buyback for payments in the wrap plan. I mean, that's in the future, but still.
Yeah. Can we get your contact information for personalized advice? Nancy will be sending out the deck. She will have her
The
contact
contact,
information.
the program contact information is here.
Uh,
We've got a bunch of counselors and counselors all over the state that are well versed in all of this.
you'll get good services. Everyone, this is what they do day in and day out. But you clearly have our names, and I'm sure. Um, I mean, you have our contact. You'll be fine. You reach out. The best way to do it is honestly through our booking appointment. Both Nancy and myself, as you can imagine, we are booked way in advance. Not to say that if you really want to see one of us, we wouldn't. We obviously would. I receive a letter threatening to garnish my pay, including my future social. Can the government do this? Yes. Oh my God. Like, I reach
Actually,
out because we
yeah.
are concerned about this, and there's rumors that this is happening already. And we need to talk because that would mean arguably that your loans are in default. So let's make sure that we differentiate between a scam and something legit. So I just reply in the chat to that question privately. Yes, the federal government can garnish your wages, take away your tax refund if you're owed any, and if you retire and get Social Security retirement, they can take up to 15% of your retirement. And student loans don't have a statute of limitations, so they can follow you to your grave. However, if you die with student loans, the government is not going to go after your estate. The loans die with you.
Yeah.
That's a little
And,
plus.
we just want to we want to see. actually want to see the notice that you got. It could either be an actual administrative wage garnishment notice, or it could just be the Department of Education telling you that these are the consequences if you don't get out of default. So we want to see the actual notification.
Do you need to go back and enter employers for when you first started paying back your loans, even if you know they don't qualify? If you really know they don't qualify, I don't think so. The system won't even allow you, right? Because when you do the PSLF help tool, it's going to ask you for the EIN number. And if it doesn't show up, then you cannot add them. So the answer is like go through the PSLF help tool. If you know they don't qualify, then yeah, no, don't do that. Um, I'm gonna keep on going. And obviously, thank you to everyone for hanging out. We still have a lot of people hanging out. We will be sharing a copy of the recording. People asked if we will be sharing the transcript of the Q&A. I think we can do that. We can also see if we have the time to put together a little Q&A with the most frequently asked questions and share it with you guys. It might take us a little bit longer, so we might do a second round of a follow-up. Um, I have one employer for my 10 years in the same company. Submit the PSLF form as soon as possible. Um, I have 5 years of PSLF. There were a couple months that didn't count. Is there a way to make them count? The only way is to file a complaint with the FSA and see if they will give you credit for it. Now, statuses that definitely don't count if the loans were in school, which doesn't seem to be the case. If they were in default, which also doesn't seem to be the case. There are some forbearances that might not count, some quote unquote administrative forbearances that just don't count. And I can tell you, we've tried with FSA to say, like, that's not fair. The client didn't get credit. And even when we had a good administration that was willing to entertain our cases, they wouldn't give credit. Now it's probably more difficult. Yes, this will be recorded. Should I do a PSLF for the 1 year program? AmeriCorp? Yes. I am not sure what job I will have in a year. Yes, file your current PSLF. And as Nancy mentioned, the key about filing the employment forms is like you want to do it when you have access to all these people. It is easy for people to go back right now to a former employer from a year or 2 years ago to say fill out this form versus 10 years later. Um, how do I make a one-on-one? Go to EdCap NY and you can book your own appointment there. Can you still apply for 22, 23 if you know not so? Yes, PSLF doesn't, there's no deadline per se, which is good and it's bad because it doesn't like pressure people, but you can submit your employment forms and earn credit towards PSLF at any point. And you can go back retroactively up until 2007, as we've discussed significantly. If my payments are currently zero, should those months still count? Yes. If you are in an income-driven repayment plan, even if your payment is zero, those months will count. File your forms to make sure that they're counting. I was 56 when I graduated. I've been working for a university for 10 and plan to retire in 8 years. When I retire, I will only have 8 years of payment. Is there a way I can receive PSLF? Unfortunately, no. You really need the 10 years for PSLF. Yeah. So
I
I
just
don't
want
know.
to, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I just want to remind everybody that time spent in the COVID forbearance, if you had the employment, if you met the employment requirements, you will get credit for that, even though you weren't making payments.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. I will also say there are other forgiveness programs and the retiree common trigger. So this is might not apply to most of us here, but if any of you down the line or currently have a chronic or disability, a chronic health condition or disability, there's this program called Total and Permanent Disability Discharge that can help discharge your loans. Unlike PSLF, that may be taxable starting next year, both at the federal and in some states. So be aware of that. The PSLF might not be the only program. Obviously, it is the fastest program. Going back to the question of like, I would have 8 years. So true story here. If you retire and you still need time, if you are willing and able to find a qualifying employment that gives you yet 30 hours, you do need the 30 hours. You may be able to still collect on your retirement and have that quote unquote part-time 30-hour job to meet the requirements. I currently have a client who needed 5 more payments and had retired. We figured it out. And, we can make it work. I think there's other opportunities where even if retired, you could work in a setting that you like, that has flexibility and still get you to the 10-year threshold. Where do I find the PSLF payment form? So you want to file the PSLF form through the help tool. If you also Google PSLF PDF form, you'll find the actual paper form. We recommend using the help tool, getting the electronic signature because that's going to be a faster processing. I think that's the question. What happens if you have more than one qualifying employer and you may have worked more than one job around the same time? Would it be beneficial to include two or just leave the main one? If you work an average of 30 hours per week for one of them for the same period, then that's all you need. If in doubt, you could do both, but all you need is to make sure that you get credit for that same time period. So if one job fulfills the 30 hours and you got credit, it's not like you're going to get extra credit for having two jobs that qualify for the same period. Can you speak more about the safe forbearance? The takeaway for the safe forbearance, we don't know when it's going to expire. Clearly, people are staying in safe because they may not be ready to switch. If you're pursuing PSLF, we do recommend you consider switching at this time to actively accumulate credit. Relying on buyback based on the backlog and other issues may not be the best option. So again, my recommendation, if you're on the safe forbearance, you should know right now what your repayment plan options are. And if you are considering switching in the next few months, I would do it before you file your taxes. Could someone help me apply for PSLF? Absolutely. Reach out through our website and our helpline. We have a helpline as well. How do I get retroactive credit for work for PSLF? File the PSLF employment certification form. Probably most of my questions can be answered by file the PSLF form. That's going to give you your solution. Should it be easier for me to get PSLF faster after my 120 if I've only had one employer for the 10 years? No, it doesn't matter. As long as you track your payment count, you could have five different employers. Administratively, it's easy for you to stay in the same job and just update your form. But honestly, I would not make career choices just on the fact that I could simplify my life by knowing who in HR is signing off on the form. With that said, I have been at TSS for over 14 years, but don't do that. Jobs and be able to complete all your paperwork needed for PSLF. Um, if you have a qualifying employment making 40 hours, but you also have a part-time that does not qualify, does your full-time get considered? Yes. You just need 30 hours per week for a qualifying employer. Anything else is extra flowers. All you need is 30 hours with a qualifying employer. If you have more than one qualifying employer and you manage to average 30 hours, you're good. How can we compare different repayment plans for different plans before applying? We have on our website an IDR calculator. I don't know, Nancy, if it's too late for me to ask you to pull that and put it in the chat. Honestly, like I really, really recommend you try the IDR plan application and do a run through. Do not submit it if you're not ready, because that's really going to give you the options you're eligible for. As Nancy mentioned, if IBR does not come up for you, it may be because you don't meet the partial financial hardship right now, and FSA is going to work that out in the coming weeks, months. I was working for the city of New York. However, my loans do not begin until 2015. Do the prior years count? No. Remember, to get credit, you must be working and the loans have to be in existence. So if you got the loans in 2015, any work, even if it was a qualifying quote unquote employer, would not count. My employer recertified me on 325, and as of 425 to 1025, I don't have a qualifying payment due, Miss. Okay, reach out. I'm not getting the question. My employer recertified me. I think for PSLF, you want to submit the PSLF form yearly or every 6 months. Just monitor to make sure you're getting credit. If you're on the safe forbearance, we still recommend that you submit your PSLF form to get the credit for your employment. But obviously, you would need to, if you're going to wait on the safe forbearance buyback, you're going to have to potentially wait, depending on where you're at, to actually see any credit and go through the buyback process. Do I need to consolidate my loans before I submit the PSLF form? No. If you have direct loans, submit it to know what is the qualifying payment on the loans. In fact, if you are thinking of consolidating one, you should reach out and do it in the next few weeks, months, definitely before April, because if you want to consolidate, we may want to like do it before the July 1st, 2026 deadlines. Not that you cannot consolidate direct loans and get weighted average. The impact after July is that you would only be eligible for the RAP plan to continue repaying based on an income-driven repayment plan. And obviously the
Carolina,
standard plan, but the whole idea is the IDR plan.
Carolina,
Um,
can I read a
yes.
question that I just kind of want people to hear? So there was an article in Forbes titled "Student Borrowers Have 10 Weeks to Avoid Penalty," saying that those who are in SAVE forbearance and were set to receive forgiveness in 2025 are now subject to being taxed on forgiveness in 2026. Can you clarify if you are still in the SAVE plan, will you be subject to tax liability next year if you stay in the SAVE plan into next year? So let me just, number one, say, because I kind of alluded to this during the presentation, this is what they're talking about is forgiveness in the income-driven forgiveness repayment plan or forgiveness program. That's not public service loan forgiveness. So that is if you have if you're paying your loans and you're not going to be able to pay them off for 20 or 25 years, and you're paying in an income in one of the income-driven repayment plans for 20 or 25 years, you get this income-driven repayment forgiveness. Starting in 2026, if you get that forgiveness will be taxed at the federal level. There was a kind of a tax exclusion period on that throughout COVID that ends at the end of this year. That does not apply to PSLF. PSLF is going to continue to be going to be tax free. But if you are in this situation, if you're close to the IDR forgiveness, if you've achieved that 20 or 25 years of qualifying payments in 2025, but your loans don't get discharged until 2026 for operational reasons, they are not going to tax you. So it's kind of a complicated question, but I just want to make it clear that when you start reading about if you when you start reading articles about this tax bomb that's going to happen starting in 2026, it doesn't apply to PSLF.
Okay, we're almost done. I mean, almost done in the sense that we'll wrap it up one way or another. Again, we will send out the recording. We will try to see if we can share the chat, and if not, and or come up with an FAQ to share. I have 95 qualifying payments and in forbearance, and we'll be retiring in 2 years. Can I buy back the qualifying for the 120? Yes, arguably you could buy back. I would recommend you switch plans if you're on the safe forbearance now and then just have less time to buy back because again the backlog is bad and like we want to avoid issues down the line, especially if you're only have 2 more years left. You have to meet the 120 um before you retire, so keep that in mind. Do we keep making pay? I don't know. Will consolidating loans negatively affect your credit? There could be a credit impact when the process is happening, but it should not be devastating. Again, my main concern is make sure you know why you're consolidating and know the implications of that. What do you do if the government isn't processing a plan change pending since January? Resubmit another IDR. If you submitted an IDR plan change earlier this year, even up until like June, July, that went nowhere. I recommend you do another application. And again, I'm going to say it again, do it before you file your next taxes. I started a part-time MSW and I have paid my tuition with some savings. At this stage, I do not have any money and will need to start getting student loans. What will be the best course of action? You should be able to get federal student loans, talk to your school about how much you will be able to borrow, and then come back to us when you need a strategy to figure out your repayment. Um, Is the student loan website simulator a good way to develop a strategy? There's some issues with the simulator, but yes, you could try it out and see it. Again, I'm going to say if you really want to know what your repayment plan options, you might as well try and do an IDR, especially if you're enrolling in an IDR. Do the IDR application, do not submit it just for you to have an idea of what plans you may be eligible for. In general, we recommend IBR, especially if it's 10%, but otherwise IBR payee unless you're a Parent Plus loan borrower. Okay. Uh, can one's child apply for college loans on their own? Yes, there are caps. So you as a student can borrow. There are caps if it's undergrad degree. So look at that as a parent. Obviously, you can borrow Parent Plus loans with the new caps that are going to go into effect. I am going to stop there because it is 1:49 and you guys have been amazing. The questions are great. We hope you found this information useful. A big thank you to Nancy, as always, for lending her expertise. And Nancy, I will turn it over to you for any final closing remarks.
Well, I just again thank you to everybody. This is a marathon session, so thank you for your patience and thank you for your questions. I mean, I we understand that this is just a confusing process. It's confused a lot of people, and we're here to help. So you will get the recording, you will get the presentation, and if you have questions or want a one-on-one, you can reach out to us. So have a great day, everybody, and happy Thanksgiving. Oh, I'm sorry. One last thing for anybody. I think a couple of you were asking about Parent Plus webinars. We don't have anything scheduled, but keep an eye on our website because we're just talking about this earlier about considering maybe doing a dedicated webinar for Parent Plus borrowers.
And we will also in the email send a link to register for a newsletter. And if you register for a newsletter, you're going to get updates and links to our upcoming webinars. So that is the best way to know what webinars we are doing at any time. But we will be sure to include that in the follow-up email. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.